We're here with the two candidates for U.S. House District 10. It's incumbent Republican Daniel Webster and Democratic nominee Michael McKenna. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Mr. McKenna, we need to take care of a bit of business that we do with newer candidates, and I don't intend to pick on you, but we have had Mr. Webster here several times before and taken care of this, so I need to ask you the same questions I ask every candidate who comes in here. Have you been arrested before?
No, sir.
Okay. Have you ever declared bankruptcy?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Let's get to business then. Mr. McKenna, why are you running for Congress?
Well, I, like many other Americans, are just tired of the stalemates that we have in Washington, D.C. right now. And as a Navy veteran, I did 14 years on active duty, and we started to see the military go through some significant changes where we began to see enlisted retention boards and perform to serve. I literally start kicking out my fellow sailors and soldiers and airmen and Marines were getting pushed to the side and were being sent home because we couldn't find money to go ahead and ensure that they were able to stay in and continue service. And for me, it was kind of a breaking point in which I decided I wanted to get out and attempt to make change, and left the service to run for office.
Have you ever run for office before?
No, first time. I figured I'd jump into the deep end of the pool and we'd give it a shot.
Okay. And what kind of leadership experience do you have that would lend itself to serving in the U.S. Congress?
I'm an Eagle Scout. Got that at the age of 18 years old, and then quickly became a Chief Petty Officer in the Navy, and acted as the recruiter in charge and division chief, running multiple areas here in Florida, all the way up the East Coast for officer recruiting and special operations recruiting as well.
Mr. Webster, why are you running for re-election?
I'm a glutton for punishment. I feel like that I went there to be, in a sense, a counselor to all, enemy of none, and I've been able to accomplish a lot of things by doing that. However, there are lots of unfinished business that I'd like to tend to, and so I'm going to give it another term and see what happens. I believe that there are several things that have happened that have been good, in that we have reduced the amount of money we're borrowing from 1.5 trillion when I got there down to 685 billion. That's still a lot of money, but it's a lot less than we were borrowing, from about 42 cents on the dollar down to about 20 cents on the dollar. So I would tell you that also I think there are some transportation things that are very important here. I've engaged myself in helping with those, and there's still more to be done. We have to reauthorize, and hopefully it'll be a long-term reauthorization of federal funding for transportation. I've worked on the Rules Committee, and I've been a promoter of regular order.
You mentioned some unfinished business, Congressman. You just mentioned transportation. What other issues are left on the table for you to address?
Well, I would like to see, from a process standpoint, us get back to regular order. If we want to have bipartisanship, we'll never do it unless we get back to taking up bills, marking them up in committee, bringing them to the floor, have open rules so that everybody can amend and debate, discuss, sending to the Senate, and then hopefully having a Senate that would respond with the same. They would move a bill through committee, bring it to the floor, debate it, we'd get together, we'd have a conference committee, and we would produce good public policy. Anything less than that usually has unintended consequences and flaws because the membership as a whole does not get to engage themselves fully.
Mr. Webster, you mentioned the deficit being reduced from 1.5 trillion or thereabouts to 685 billion. What have you done personally to contribute to the reduction in the deficit?
Well, I've tried to set a personal example first. I have turned back about 30% of the money I'm appropriated for my office to operate that. At the end of this year, it'll probably be over $1.5 million I've turned back. I've rolled my salary back because I was told when I got there, if we could roll spending back to 2008, we could come close to balancing the budget. So I did that. I've rolled my salary back voluntarily to take a check to the Treasury each year and help pay down the debt there. I have refused the the health care benefits that are given, that are subsidized benefits to every member of Congress. And so from a personal level, I tried to set a personal example. And then I have done some other things, including I've sponsored the Thrift Act, which would do the same thing that I did with my members account that I use to run my office, but it would allow for the bureaucracy to be rewarded. Right now, not to make a long answer, but fraud and abuse, you hear fraud, waste, and abuse mentioned together. Fraud and abuse are against the law, and they're punishable by prison or fine or both. But waste is not; it's rewarded. And so, because there's a principle that I don't believe in, but there's a principle that says if it's appropriated, spend it. Even if it's a less amount that's appropriated, they're going to spend every dime of it. And I've proven that you don't have to do that. And so my Thrift Act would reward those who don't spend it all. Agency head or a department head or a bureau or whoever, if they were able to do that, we would guarantee getting back up to 25% of the money back to them. They could spend it on any program they wanted to spend it on, and the rest of it would go to paying down the debt.
Where does that bill stand? Has that passed, or what's the status of it?
It has not passed yet. It's still in committee.
Mr. McKenna, can you tell us, if you were elected to succeed Congressman Webster, what would be your top 3 priorities in office?
The very first issue would be equality amongst the GLBTA community, and working to make sure that they have the appropriate representation. Another aspect that I would go ahead and focus on would be the budget, as well as cutting down on wasteful spending, which we see at an all-time high. And the other thing that I would go ahead and focus on really would be improving the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act that is currently in place.
I'm curious, why was the equality issue number 1 on your hit list?
It's number 1 because I myself have a transgender son, so I have been through the ringer and back to make sure that he gets fair treatment everywhere he goes. We've been declined medical doctors before who, because of their religious views, have literally turned us away at their door to go ahead and treat him. We've had experiences in schools where he goes into use a restroom in which he feels comfortable and is declined the right to use certain restrooms. So we see on a daily basis, and I live it each and every single day, the inequality that we have to go through with my son and how he gets treated. And it's just not right. And it's not right for anyone to have to be treated like that.
So you would be in support then of eliminating same-sex marriage bans?
Absolutely.
Congressman, where do you currently stand on same-sex marriage?
I supported the Defense of Marriage Act. I've been married today. Actually, it's my anniversary, 42 years.
Happy anniversary.
And, yeah. And so, but I support the Defense of Marriage. Passed over 60% of the vote. I think the federal government has overreached in some areas, and mandating to states is one of them, not just in that area, but a lot of areas.
How about the bill known as ENDA, which would outlaw on the federal level discrimination based on sexual orientation or sexual identity?
I believe every American should be treated the same, no matter what. And so, to me, I'm for anything that brings Americans together, which would be treating them exactly the same in every single case. I think that's a good thing.
So would you vote for that bill?
I have not. I don't usually commit to something I haven't read. I have not read that bill yet. It hasn't made it out of committee, and so I would like to read it first.
Mr. McKenna, you brought up the Affordable Care Act, and I believe the words you said would be improving it. Can you tell us what you see as being some of the areas of that legislation that stand to be approved?
Absolutely. Well, one area would be the tax that we have right now on medical devices, which in recent legislation that was actually just taken up for a vote the other day, it did have a section in there. The Jobs Act had a section to go ahead and remove that excess tax. But that is something that needs to happen. You know, nobody should be paying taxes on sleep apnea machines like I myself use, or needles for diabetics. And we also need to go ahead and try to do whatever we can to reduce the amount of money that we're charging, that insurance companies are charging for simple services. My aunt, who recently passed away, went a total of 6 miles in an ambulance in one direction and paid $800. Coming the other direction because she had an IV, it was almost a $4,000 bill. That's absurd. You know, the same amount of distance traveled, and with just a simple IV, we add that much to it. So we have to go ahead and rein in this excessive cost that's coming from it. And the other thing we need to do too is work with small businesses to ensure that they can afford the opportunity to provide decent healthcare coverage for all of their employees and make it affordable for those small businesses. And we want to make sure that we keep costs low for every American, which is what the ultimate objective was, is to make sure patients are protected and healthcare is affordable. But it needs to be affordable for all Americans, and that includes businesses as well.
Congressman, you have voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act more than 50 times, even though a growing number of people are supporting the consumer protections included in that. Indeed, a recent poll from the Conservative Heritage Action polling group, which actually oversampled Republicans, found that respondents were more inclined to say that the Affordable Care Act should be kept rather than junked. Given this, will you continue to back the repeal of Obamacare?
Well, the 2 times that I voted to repeal it, not the 50, we did have, it was a repeal and replace, which would be repair what's there, take the good things and get rid of the bad. The rest of them included things like Mr. McKenna just mentioned. We have passed those. Those were with bipartisan support, and those were the 50. They try to say we're repealing the entire law. Most 10 of the, or 11 of those have been accepted by the president and have been signed into law, so that reduces the amount some. And then others, most of which the president has done on his own, he has bypassed. He hasn't ended them, he just has pushed them aside, like the corporate mandate, like the cap on out-of-pocket expenses and so forth. The president's already done those, knowing he knows the law is flawed, but he just has not been willing for the Congress to actually show him what's wrong. He's done it on his own, but it's the same exact things that we've passed out of the House.
When you say the president pushed it aside, isn't the reality that he just delayed the implementation of some of these things?
And that's what I meant. Yes, he did. And but we haven't seen him come back yet, and some we probably won't.
Congressman, let's talk about immigration policy. Last year, you stated that you were open to a pathway to citizenship conditioned on border security verified by GAO, E-Verify. We're a year on from there. The issue continues to change. So I wonder if you could tell us where you stand at this point on a path to citizenship and the rest of the details of the policy.
Yes, and I am in favor of what I said last year. I did have a priorities list, and one was to seal off the borders first. We reiterated that again here just recently with a bill that passed the House of Representatives. And to me, that's the most important thing, not just from an immigration standpoint. It's a national security issue. We have, and it's a human trafficking, drug trafficking issue. So it's very important. The internal E-Verify is for the 40% that's come here legally and just decided not to go home. And those would be, so there has to be internal enforcement also. E-Verify would probably be the easiest to accomplish that. And also allowing the state law enforcement, local law enforcement to participate in securing the borders and the internal enforcement. Then there's a backlog of people who could legitimately and legally come here, but the immigration and naturalization have not gotten to them. So there's a son or a daughter in another country. We have cases in our own office where people have called us, and they're ongoing cases where they filed back in 2006 or 2005, but right now, unfortunately, they're only at the year 2000, 2001. So there's a lag. So you got to fix the backlog, and then I think we can talk about a pathway.
Where do you stand on the particulars of immigration policy?
Well, we definitely need to go ahead and secure the border. I think that's the very first thing. I know that they had just proposed sending large amounts of money down to the border to ensure that it was secured. But what we need to do is we need to take a look at the border security and find out the reasons why so many individuals are fleeing to the border. I mean, we all know that the United States is a great nation, but we also know that drug cartels are running amok down south of the border, and that is driving many people to want to flee to get out of the situations that they live in. So while we secure the border, we need need to make sure that we have a clear pathway to citizenship for those Americans that are here. And we also need to make sure, as the Congressman said, that that backlog gets cleaned up as quickly as possible. So I think we need to focus on the administrative side of the House more so than just dropping billions of dollars on a border to secure it, which ultimately will probably not do anything but create more violence on that border itself. So I'd like to see money be spent towards the administration portion to help expedite the process.
But I just want to make sure I'm clear. You are open to a pathway to citizenship
Absolutely.
for the, okay.
Absolutely.
Congressman, does your immigration position also still include support for local law enforcement's enforcement of immigration laws?
Yes, it does, because we can't hire enough. Matter of fact, even in some of the other proposals, we cannot actually have in place enough enforcement, or federal enforcement, before 2021, and that's probably too late. So using local law enforcement to enforce federal laws, not to enforce their own laws, but to enforce federal laws, and using state enforcement would be very much a part of not only securing the borders, but more importantly, it's the internal enforcement where people have overstayed their visa.
Where do you stand on that particular part of the equation, Mr. McKenna?
As far as local law enforcement being able to enforce, again, the federal laws are not their own, I support that as well.
Congressman, you can correct us if you're wrong, but the record that we've seen says that you have a bill that you have sponsored has never been passed, and only a couple that you co-sponsored have passed. Does this raise your effectiveness or call your effectiveness into question as a legislator?
Well, in my mind, no. I believe that there are bills that I have engaged myself in that have benefited Florida and the rest of the country, which have my fingerprints all over them, and yet it may not have my name at the top. For instance, the water bill, which most people would say, Democrat and Republican, that I was the lead person on the water bill. It is one of the biggest economic components to our economic engine here in Florida, and it passed. It was the first time we've done one in 7 years. Florida was a boon to Florida. We got about a quarter of the projects, and the rest of the country got the other 3/4. Just about every major port got a project. The Everglades, we did some great work there. The South Florida Water Management District would come to me earlier and ask if they could do projects on their own as opposed to the Corps doing them. And the Corps would be the manager. They can do them for a lot cheaper, a lot quicker. We were able to get that into the bill. We were able to get the fix for Tampa Bay and their dredging there. Same with Jacksonville, 2 different areas that need to be dredged before the Panama Canal opens up. Same with the Port of Miami. There was also an issue with maintenance in Port Canaveral, and I was asked to fix that. I did. I got the people in the room, the Corps and their lawyer, and so that they could maintain something that was going to be done by the port itself, that they would continue doing operating maintenance. And I could give a lot of other examples in that particular bill, much less other things that I've engaged myself in. So it's not just passing bills; it's making a statement which gets to the Senate and dies. It's something that's going to pass. You get on board. I spent a lot of time working on that particular piece of legislation.
Mr. McKenna, what about that defense of his record? Do you buy that?
Well, it's if the congressman feels that that was being effective, then that's what his take is on it. As he said, his name might not be on every single bill. Now, what he did behind the scenes, I cannot speak to that. I can only speak to what I would like to see done from my own perspective, and that would be to get my hands on as many bills and submit as many bills as I possibly can. One of the things that I know that I'm tired of seeing, and I think every American can agree, that we're tired of seeing legislation submitted that has a title on it, and then within it is hidden several different areas in which the American people, we need to change things. I mean, on a jobs bill, to submit a Jobs Act and then have in that healthcare repairs in hopes that another legislator may or may not read through that legislation to pass it, that's what I think is driving myself and other Americans really, I guess you could say batty, but because it is, it's frustrating to see. You have all this legislation that is attempting to go through Congress and Senate and stalling out at one of the houses, and there are things that are hidden in legislation that shouldn't be hidden, and we hope that our legislators catch it and make the best decisions for the American people.
You, Mr. McKenna, you have expressed frustration with Congress that I think a lot of Americans feel. But I'm wondering whether or not that's a sufficient qualification for office. I think if frustration with Congress were a qualification, there could be millions of people running for Congress. Mr. Webster was a state legislator for 28 years, I believe, before he went into Congress.
Absolutely.
So what beyond your frustration and the leadership experience in the military that you mentioned qualifies you to serve?
Well, I think the question should be what qualifies any individual who decides to run for office the first time. Congressman Webster had to get his start someplace, and when you start off, you sit there and your qualifications may or may not be sufficient for the role that you feel you're going to, go ahead and run for. But at the end of the day, it's the effort that you put in when you're in office and the results and listening to the American people and pushing for what the people in the 10th Congressional District are looking for. And when I don't have all the answers to all the problems that this world faces, and I don't have all the solutions to all the problems in the 10th Congressional District. But I do know that if I use my resources of listening to the American people and using the groundwork that has been laid by other legislators, that we can come up with some decent solutions and submit legislation to bring forth results that I think every American everywhere will be happy with.
Mr. McKenna, what do you see as the biggest hurdle to economic recovery in your district, and what would you do to tackle that if you were elected to office?
It's jobs is the number one problem we have. I know that when I separated from the Navy, I submitted over 100 job applications and was told everything from you're overqualified to we can't afford to pay you enough money right now. And I think what needs to be done is we need to work with local legislators, city commissioners, and county commissioners to go ahead and instead of waiting for corporations to come to us, we need to go to them. And we need to recruit those corporations to come into our backyard and give them the best opportunity to settle in, whether it be to look at what we can do for their tax incentives to move into the 10th Congressional District, and to look at what we can do to benefit. And I had a chance to sit down with city and county commissioners the other day at several different events, and we all agreed that it is working from the top down and from the bottom up to bring corporations in and help get jobs and get the economy moving again in the 10th District.
Same question to you, Congressman. What do you see as the biggest current hurdles, and if re-elected, how would you tackle that?
Well, I think it is the economy, it is jobs. People need to be employed, and we can solve a lot of problems by getting them employed as opposed and be bringing responsibility back to people as opposed to just paying them to get on a welfare roll. So to me, like I said, I mentioned earlier, the WARTA bill, that is a jobs bill, and it passed the House, it passed the Senate. I was on the conference committee, we worked out our differences. It worked just the way I explained it when we first started off. It's one of the few that has, and it went to the President. The President signed it. It is a great infrastructure bill. It will do awesome things for this state as far as jobs, not just in the areas of the ports, but as we expand, the Panama Canal is expanding also, and they're going to be bigger ships. They're going to be able to come dock at our ports, and it's going to be a huge, huge success because we're going to be a transportation focal point, and not only that, we're going to be a goods focal point. And to me, that's one of the things we've done that actually has produced jobs and will in the future produce jobs. There are other things too. I'm a little disappointed. We have sent about 40 bills down to the Senate. They've not even acted in committee on one of them. Those two would help. I wish we could do more, but we took advantage of what we had. I think in the coming term, we'll be working, like I said, on the reauthorization of transportation. That too is building infrastructure all through the state. I have worked with Secretary Fox and our own Secretary of Transportation on a TIFIA loan for I-4. We were able to get that in the time necessary. I talked directly with The secretary convinced him that it's a project we needed to do. He said, I'm on it, it's done, count it done. And then I've also worked with a couple of the other department heads on other issues like that, but I think it's those create jobs.
Do you think that raising the federal minimum wage is a variable in this equation to help Americans get back on their feet?
No, I don't. I think giving everybody an opportunity to advance is what we need to do, and the more the government can get out of the way, let job creators create jobs, and get our economy rolling. We're in a period of time where the unemployment, it seems lower, but the actual number of people employed is low also, in that it's as low as it's been since the early 70s as far as the job participation rate. And that to me is a concern because those people are not working, they're not paying taxes. So if we're going to ever do anything with the debt, we got two ways to do it. One is we cut spending, and we're working on that, and I've already talked about that. We have done some of that. But on the other hand, you have to build a base of people who are going to be productive and pay taxes and help us. So it kind of squeezes to the middle, and eventually you can get to a balanced budget. But you can't do that unless we get an economy going. One of the things I think is important, unfortunately, we've not been able to move, but I've been a great supporter of, and that's tax reform. I think businesses who would be paying less. We have the highest corporate tax rates in the world. And people wonder why are corporations leaving? They're leaving because they have to pay too many taxes here and they can't be competitive. This is a global economy, and so they're taking off. And unfortunately, I don't like it. I don't think it's a good thing. But the way to do that is to revise our tax code and create a lower level of taxation.
Thank you, Mr. McKenna. 2 points the Congressman raised in this one. Well, first, I guess address the minimum wage question. Where do you stand on that?
I definitely think the minimum wage needs to increase, and the reason for it is because we look around us and we see the prices are going up, but the Americans aren't having the money to go ahead and do what we used to do back in the good old days when Americans would work a 40-hour week, be able to take a family vacation, put their kids through school, and be okay, but yet we can't do that anymore. We now see, especially here in Central Florida, we see it all the time, that come holiday season, gas prices go up because we try to get as much as we can out of the tourists that are in our own backyard. And the minimum wage increase, I would necessarily not have gone ahead and started with a 10-10 because there's small businesses that couldn't afford that increase. Drive up Route 27 all the way from going from Winter Haven all the way up to Leesburg area, and you're going to see for lease and for sale signs on businesses and corporations that have shut down because they're trying to figure out a way to survive. As the Congressman said, corporate tax rate of 35%. When you look over at internationally, and the average is roughly around 22, 23%. President Clinton's been saying for years that we need to reduce that corporate tax down to help bring businesses that are international and keep them here in the United States, and we need to do that. And as far as the minimum wage going back, we do need to go ahead and increase it. I would have proposed a $9.50 minimum wage to start with, and then an increase over what could be the next 5 to 6 years. And then what we do is make sure that small businesses have the resources they need to get assistance, to make sure that we don't put any of the small businesses under.
And the Congressman also mentioned reforming our tax codes. Would you be in favor of doing that? And if so, would you support ideas such as the flat tax or any of those types of options?
Well, I'm not closed-minded to the flat or a fair tax, but I think right now that the tax code itself does need to be completely overhauled. I mean, there's so much in that tax code that even individuals who do our taxes, my own taxes, they don't even know what they're necessarily doing or what we're filing. So we do need to revisit that, and it does need to be completely overhauled.
Congressman, you are a member of the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee arguably was one of the guiding forces behind last year's government shutdown and this year's lawsuit against President Obama. Do you support those two actions, and do you think that's what your constituents sent you to Washington to do?
Right. Well, I would say this. First of all, I never voted to shut down government. It certainly was never one of my issues that I wanted to do. And eventually, when I had a chance to reopen it and the Senate agreed, we did. But each of the bills that were passed were bills that actually kept government open, and the Senate rejected and would not take them. As a matter of fact, would not even negotiate or come to the table and say what they would be willing to do until later on, about 15 days later. In the end, I mean, all we were asking for is for the Congress, the President, and the Secretary of Sebelius and the Cabinet to be under the Affordable Care Act. I don't blame them for not wanting to be, but they didn't, and so that was that. On the other hand, as far as suing the President, I basically said yes. I voted for that. People say, well, it's the first time a president's ever been sued. I was sued as Speaker of the House by the governor of the state of Florida. It was the first time a Speaker of the House had ever been sued. It wasn't that it had nothing to do with a conflict between the governor and myself. Matter of fact, that very next day, we got together on an education package which was major in the state. It had to do with the office of Speaker and the office of governor. And he disagreed with me taking up some veto overrides, which we overrode, and he wanted his veto messages back. He sued. The Supreme Court ended up ruling in my favor, but the point was it established the line between the executive and legislative branch, and now everyone from now on knows. Same here. This is not between John Boehner and Barack Obama. This is between the legislative body, which is the Congress, and the President, which is the administration. So I think all we're trying to do is establish how much and how far a president can go without getting legislative approval, congressional approval. And that will be decided in the court. We'll see what happens. But I believe that, in my mind, he has overstepped and done things that the executive branch did not have the ability to do unless authorized by Congress.
Would you support an impeachment resolution in the House?
No. Matter of fact, I tried to get them to use a writ, which is much more effective, a writ of quo warranto. By what authority? You asked the court by what authority. That was used in our state with Charlie Crist and the Speaker. Between them, there was he had signed a petition to and a covenant and an agreement with the Seminole tribes to do casino gambling. The only thing is, he didn't have the authority to do that. And there was a question brought, a writ of quo warranto, which says, by what authority did you do this? And the Supreme Court ruled that that writ was valid in that the governor did not have the authority. So it's not unusual for there to be a readjusting to make sure we know where the lines are between the judicial and the executive and legislative branches.
So you're saying you favored that writ over the lawsuit?
I did.
Yes.
I did.
I'm dwelling on this issue because you had a reputation for being bipartisan in the legislature, and you certainly have talked about your interest in that goal in Congress. But I'm wondering, and you have talked in some depth about the water projects bill, but is there anything else that you can tell us where you have made efforts that have produced results on bipartisanship?
Yes, I've mainly talked about here the dinners I've had with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. But I also am a part of a bipartisan working group. And that working group is made up of an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. We meet at least every 2 weeks. And in the morning, 7:30 in the morning, and we go over legislation. We have sponsored, and some has become law, and we have put forth issues. Others have been included in, most of them have been just included in packages, and it's a bipartisan effort, and we've connected ourselves together. We are now working on a way to how we would get to balancing the budget. There's a group, a nonpartisan group, that has a sort of a program. You go through and you answer all the questions you would answer on decisions you'd have to make about Social Security and Medicare and other things, and then where does that bring you? And it gets you to the amount of savings, and eventually you could get to a balanced budget. Each of us are participating by ourselves at a later date, we're going to get together, go over the results, and see if we can come to an agreement on what it would take to bring about a balanced budget in the future.
Congressman, are you still a member in good standing of the Grover Norquist No Tax Pledge?
Well, I think I'm not sure how long it lasts. Remember, I think when I was here last time, you asked me, and I said, I don't know, is it a lifetime appointment or whatever? I think I signed it back in the state senate or whenever, and at that time I was against it. But I did also commit that, if there were a offer on the table, and it was the same offer that was given to each of the presidential candidates this last time, which was $10 for one. Yeah, I'm in. Matter of fact, I also voted against the fiscal cliff because we were within a doable amount to balance the budget. I mean, we were so close. It was a couple of maybe $100 billion, something like that. Far different than 1.5 trillion. And we could have done it, and it just seemed like an opportunity. But we never got to discussing that. No one really wanted to talk about what would be the advantages to the deficit, to the debt, and the potential of balancing the budget.
Let's let Mr. McKenna talk first about what you would do to promote bipartisanship if you were elected.
Well, it's simple. It's just simply reaching across the aisle. I'm glad to hear that the Congressman meets every 2 weeks in a bipartisan group to sit down and discuss things. You had mentioned before, I think, about the number of legislation. You had asked the ineffective ability, and I think if the Congressman, if you're meeting 2 times a week or every 2 weeks with bipartisan, that we would have more bills coming out with the Congressman's name on it. I mean, that's one of the things, is that you sign on to work bipartisan, and that produces the legislation that goes straight through and becomes, hopefully becomes the law and gets through the committees. But simply just making sure that you have good quality discussions with every political affiliation. We're past the days of political affiliations, and we need to start putting the people first. As I'm out campaigning and we go out and meet with Republican groups and Republican organizations, they want someone who's willing to listen to them and put their interest first, and that's what needs to happen.
And would you consider tax increases if you're elected?
The answer to considering it is yes. I would need to see what types of tax increases we would be looking at and who they would affect. But yes, I'd always consider increasing taxes.
Yeah. How about higher taxes on the wealthy?
Not necessarily higher taxes on the wealthy, but definitely raising the bracket for which is covered.
Are you talking about Social Security specifically, or are you talking if you could explain that?
Yeah, well, we want to make sure that an individual who makes $19,000 a year and pays full taxes on that $19,000, anyone, no matter what amount of income they make, should be paying taxes on all earned income.
How about higher taxes on corporations?
No. That'll go back to what we discussed before. Corporations will start leaving again. We want to make sure that they come back to the United States and stay here.
How about closing corporate tax loopholes?
Yes.
Well, you addressed this a bit earlier, Mr. McKenna, regarding your service in the Navy, and we thank you for your service, of course. Where do you stand on the defense budget? Do you see making additional cuts, or do we need to increase our defense spending? We
definitely don't need to increase defense spending. That should not be an option. What we do need to do, though, is we need to cut down on, once again, the waste that we have right now. I've seen it firsthand that we purchase toilet seats even that are $200 a piece. That's absurd. And that's the type of thing that we need to go ahead and we need to rein in. And it comes down to accountability. And making sure that if you're doing waste and fraud, and as the Congressman said, that's against the law, and we need to go ahead and punish the individuals who are committing these violations, and there needs to be accountability in spending. When a general tells you that we don't need tanks, we don't need to start spending millions of dollars for tanks that we don't need, and we don't need to continue on government contracts that are not in the best interest of the United States.
So do you think the Obama administration is doing a poor job in reining in waste and defense spending?
I think overall, I think it needs to be reined in better. I think that they've made significant strides to try to and attempt to rein it in. However, I don't think that it's as effective as it could be.
Congressman, where do you stand on defense spending?
Well, if something is not done, there's going to be an automatic cut again. We're going to get back to sequestration, and so I would not favor that. I've said that before. I don't like across-the-board cuts. I think what happens when you do that is you get the good with the bad, and it doesn't work. And so to me, we have to do something in the coming days, which will be for the 2016 budget. Sequestration comes back, and it will be a sharp cut. And most of the leadership within the military are saying it would be too much. We cannot survive with that. We would be cutting back. The problem also with the military is when you make these cuts and you let people go, like we're purging a huge number of majors out of the Air Force that fly planes. It's not like you can turn the switch off pretty easy and you save that money. But when you start to turn the switch back on, it's very difficult. So you click it on and then it's going to take years to build back up. We've experienced that before, and we better be careful that we don't step into it again.
Congressman, you have voted in favor of House budget resolutions that in their details include a fundamental restructuring of Medicare. Do you support that specific part of the package?
Yes, in each of those cases, which would balance the budget, which was the important part, we're working towards a balanced budget. Each of those cases, anyone near or in retirement would not be affected at all. Then those within a 10-year period of time, which would be 10 years later, would be offered options, not the ones that are currently in. They would be for the rest of their life in the current Medicare system. The options would include a system that would be like Medicare. It would also include other means and other ways and other choices. And I think it's the only way that we're going to be able to save it. Medicare Trust Fund for hospitals goes broke in just a few years. It'll be here before we know it. And we've got to do something. And that something is we've got to balance the budget. And the way to balance it is to make some fundamental changes. However, all it does is save and secure Medicare and provide for those who are not at retirement now with a plan that would also take care of them in their latter years.
Mr. McKenna, do you support the kind of changes in Medicare premium that the House budget called for, premium support for people who are 55 and younger, providing money to cover or offset the cost of senior health care rather than the first dollar coverage through Medicare that's offered now?
Yes.
That's position in support of that's contrary to a lot of Democrats.
Mm-hmm. But we need to go ahead and do what's going to be in the best interest of the American people, and what's going to make sure that they have the funding that they need to ensure that they are taken care of at any age that requires it. You know, as far as supporting a specific resolution, I would need to read through the resolution. But as per your question posed, yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that Congress needs to balance the budget within the next decade?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I don't think there's any doubt about that. That we should have a balanced budget.
Would you consider any changes to Social Security that would slow spending growth in that program?
No, I think my biggest concern with Social Security is the amount of payments that we currently pay out to senior citizens that are collecting Social Security and ensuring that they have enough to be able to live comfortably. And that's my biggest concern that I have right now, and that's one of the concerns that the citizens in the 10th District have too as we go around. As far as the program itself, I know that when we we need to stop dipping into any kind of Social Security trust or any kind of pots when it comes down to. I know that we took out, I think it was roughly 1.7, I think it was $1 trillion or $1 billion out of it during the Iraq War to help fund. We need to make sure that all the money that sits in Social Security is used for Social Security.
So so you would take Social Security off the table in any effort to balance the budget within 10 years?
No, Social Security always needs to be on the table.
Hmm.
Congressman, what are your current positions on gun control? Do you still support easing restrictions on interstate gun purchases, for instance?
I am a believer in the Second Amendment, and I support, the right to bear arms.
Do you see there being any restrictions on gun ownership or gun purchase that you would support?
Any new ones?
Mhm.
No, I don't.
Mr. McKenna?
Yes, to go back to your previous question, and then I'll come back to the Second Amendment question. As far as making or reducing Social Security to balance the budget, you mean? Is that what, to go back to that question? Because Social Security, making cuts to Social Security to balance the budget should never take effect. We should never do that. And then to the Second Amendment, I am for the Second Amendment. And as far as any kind of restrictions on purchasing or buying, I just feel that every single American, whether at gun shows or wherever the case may be, we need background checks to be in place.
Just to clarify, Congressman, where do you stand on the proposals for universal background checks, including things like private sales at gun shows?
I think what I would focus on is not that, but on the Tim Murphy bill, which I'm a co-sponsor, which is the mental health bill. We have got some people who are getting weapons, and it's not through sales necessarily. They're just getting them and they're using them in a totally irrational way. And our mental health system has been broken. I think his idea of focusing in on that and setting up some standards even locally is an awesome idea, and I hope that bill comes to fruition.
If you don't have any concluding questions, I think we can wrap this up. We thank you both for coming in today.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.